What if a company promised to completely revolutionize healthcare, not improve it around the edges, not make it slightly more convenient, revolutionize it? That was the promise of Theranos. The company claimed it could perform a wide range of blood tests using just a few drops of blood from a finger prick. No large needles, no multiple vials, no long waits, no complicated trip through the traditional laboratory system. For patients, it sounded amazing. For doctors, it sounded disruptive. For investors, it sounded like the future. And money followed. Hundreds of millions of dollars were invested into Theranos. The company was valued in the billions. Elizabeth Holmes became one of the most celebrated entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley. The press couldn't get enough of her. Magazine covers, interviews, conference stages, glowing profiles, and comparisons to some of the most successful technology founders in history. At one point, she even appeared on stage at the Clinton Global Initiative with Alibaba founder Jack Ma and former President Bill Clinton, who introduced her to the audience with the kind of credibility most entrepreneurs could only dream of. The credibility surrounding the company was enormous. Theranos had big-name investors, major retail partnerships, a board of directors that included people like former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger and former Secretary of State George Shultz. These were not unknown people taking a flyer on a risky startup. These were some of the most recognized names in business, government, media, and technology lining up behind what appeared to be a revolutionary company. And then it all collapsed. So, what went wrong? 15 years after Theranos was founded, the company was gone. The investors had lost hundreds of millions of dollars. The founder and former president of Theranos were sentenced to prison. The patients who trusted the company were put at risk, and many of the people who promoted, defended, funded, and celebrated Theranos were left with damaged credibility. How did a company with such a powerful mission, so much money, so much press, and so many influential people behind it go from the future of healthcare to one of the most infamous business failures in modern history? The reluctant lesson of Theranos is not that bold visions are dangerous. Bold visions are necessary. The lesson is that vision without verification is not innovation. It's a warning sign. Theranos was founded in 2003 by Elizabeth Holmes, who dropped out of Stanford with an ambitious idea. She wanted to make blood testing easier, faster, cheaper, and more accessible. Instead of drawing blood from a vein, filling multiple vials, and sending those samples through the traditional laboratory system, Theranos claimed it could run a wide range of tests from a tiny sample of blood collected from a single finger prick. It was a compelling idea. In fact, it was more than compelling. It was the kind of idea people wanted to be true. Most of us have had blood drawn at some point. It's not usually a pleasant experience. For some people, it's intimidating. For others, it's inconvenient. For people managing chronic health conditions, repeated blood draws can become part of life. So the idea that this process could be simplified made sense. And that is, in part, what makes the Theranos story so important. The problem Theranos identified was real. The need was real. The opportunity was real. The mission was attractive. But identifying a real problem is not the same as solving it. That distinction matters. Entrepreneurs are often good at identifying problems. We see inefficiencies. We see outdated processes. We see customer frustration. We see waste. We see unnecessary friction. We see opportunities where others see normal. That is the beginning of innovation. But the marketplace does not reward the identification of a problem forever. Eventually, the business has to prove that the solution works. That's the beginning of innovation. But the marketplace doesn't reward the identification of a problem forever. Eventually, the business has to prove that its solution works. That is where Theranos began to separate from reality. The company claimed it had developed proprietary technology that can perform comprehensive blood testing from tiny samples. The machine was sometimes referred to as Edison. Later versions were referred to by other names, including the Mini Lab. The pitch was clean and simple. Small sample, small machine, fast results, lower cost, better access. It was a beautiful story. But blood testing is not simply a convenience problem. It's a science problem. It's a biology problem. It's a chemistry problem. It's an engineering problem. It's a regulatory problem. It's a quality systems problem. And in healthcare, accuracy is not a feature. Accuracy is the product. That's where the promise of Theranos ran into the reality of medicine. The company's proprietary analyzer couldn't perform the broad range of tests Theranos claimed it could perform. Many patient tests were reportedly performed on modified or standard commercial machines made by other companies, even though the public story suggested that Theranos' own technology was doing the work. That's not a minor detail. That's not a footnote. That is the difference between a company saying we are developing something that may someday work and a company saying this works now. One statement is ambition. The other is representation. And once patients, doctors, investors, regulators, and business partners rely on that representation, the stakes become enormous. Theranos didn't just sell a product. Theranos sold certainty. That may be the most dangerous part of the story. The company created what I would call a credibility machine. It surrounded itself with the symbols of trust: important investors, well-known board members, powerful political figures, high-profile media coverage, major retail partnerships, polished messaging, carefully managed demonstrations, and a founder who became the face of a new kind of healthcare revolution. All of this made Theranos look validated, but there's a difference between looking validated and being validated. A famous board is not validation. A major investor is not validation. A magazine cover is not validation. A stage appearance with a former president is not validation. A retail partnership is not validation. A compelling founder is not validation. Validation means that technology works repeatedly, reliably, independently, under real conditions, with real users, with real consequences. Theranos had a story that appeared validated because important people were standing near it, but proximity to credibility is not the same as proof. This is one of the larger business lessons from Theranos. When enough impressive people say something is real, others stop asking whether it actually works. Investors assume other investors did the due diligence. Partners assume the board must know what it's doing. The media assumes the company has already been vetted. Customers assume big-name endorsements mean the product is ready. Employees assume leadership must know something they don't. Momentum begins to replace evidence, and that is dangerous. It's especially dangerous when the company operates inside a high-consequence industry. Theranos was not selling an app. It was not selling a consumer gadget. It was not selling a convenience product. It was selling medical testing. A bad medical test result is not merely an inconvenience. It can affect treatment. It can affect medication. It can affect whether a patient seeks additional care. It can create fear. It can create false reassurances. It can influence decisions made by doctors and patients, and that changes everything. In some businesses, a product that doesn't work causes frustration. In healthcare, a product that doesn't work can cause harm. That's why the standards are higher. That's why testing matters. That's why documentation matters. That's why regulation matters. That's why independent validation matters. You can't just declare a product reliable because the brochure is impressive. The product either performs under real-world conditions or it does not. The process is either controlled or it is not. The data either supports the claim or it does not. The same principle applied to Theranos, only the consequences were even more personal. The company wanted to move fast, but some industries cannot be treated like software. You can't beta test your way through patient safety. You can't just fake it until you make it when the result may affect someone's health. Personally, I've always had a problem with the phrase, fake it until you make it. I understand what people usually mean by it. They mean that entrepreneurs need confidence. They mean you may need to act bigger than you are. They mean you may need to sell a vision before every detail is complete. There is some truth in that, but there is a limit. You can fake confidence, you cannot fake capability. You can fake polish, you can't fake performance. You can fake a brand, you can't fake science. And if you try, the truth eventually becomes operational. That's exactly what happened to Theranos. For years, the company controlled the story. It controlled access. It controlled messaging. It controlled demonstrations. It controlled what employees could say. It controlled what investors were told. It controlled what partners were allowed to see. But eventually, a business has to operate outside the story. Eventually, customers use the product. Eventually, employees see the gap. Eventually, regulators ask questions. Eventually, journalists investigate. Eventually, partners get nervous. And eventually, reality shows up. And the reality is not impressed by charisma. Theranos was also famously secretive. Now, secrecy in business isn't automatically wrong. Companies protect intellectual property. They protect trade secrets. They protect competitive advantages. They don't hand their competitors the blueprint. That's normal. But secrecy can serve two very different purposes. Sometimes secrecy protects innovation. Other times, secrecy protects dysfunction. In a healthy company, confidentiality doesn't eliminate accountability. It does not eliminate testing. It does not eliminate quality control. It does not eliminate documentation. It doesn't eliminate the independent review. It doesn't eliminate responsibility. But in an unhealthy company, secrecy can become a hiding place. It can prevent people from seeing the full picture. It can keep technical teams isolated from one another. It can prevent employees from comparing notes. It can make legitimate questions feel like disloyalty. That appears to be part of what happened at Theranos. The company wasn't just secretive with the outside world. It reportedly operated with internal silos, limited visibility, and an intense culture of control. That kind of culture is dangerous because it interferes with correction. Every company makes mistakes. Every company has failures. Every company runs into unexpected problems. That's not the issue. The issue is what the company does with those problems. In healthy companies, bad news travels fast. In dangerous companies, bad news is managed or buried or reframed or punished. That is a major difference. Bad news isn't the enemy of a company. Bad news is information. It tells you where the process is weak. It tells you where the product is not ready. It tells you where the claim is unsupported. It tells you where the business is exposed. Good leaders want that information early. Bad leaders want that information quiet. Theranos didn't fail because blood testing was easy and the company was incompetent. Theranos failed because blood testing was hard and the company continued to tell the world it had solved the problem before it actually solved the problem. There is a huge difference. A company can survive technical difficulty. A company can survive missed milestones. A company can survive a failed prototype. A company can survive a pivot. A company can survive saying, "We're not ready yet." But it's much harder to survive when the company has already told the world, investors, partners, and patients that the breakthrough has arrived. And that is how the lie gets heavier. At first, the company sells the future. Then it has to defend the future. Then it has to protect the future. Then it has to hide the gap between the future it promised and the present it actually has. Over time, the organization becomes less focused on solving the problem and more focused on protecting the story. That is when the company becomes fragile. Theranos had a powerful mission, and that mission made the company even more persuasive. This is another reluctant lesson. A noble mission doesn't guarantee noble behavior. In fact, a noble mission can sometimes make people less skeptical. When a company says it wants to make healthcare more accessible, people want to support it. When a company says it wants to empower patients, people believe it. When a company says it wants to reduce costs, eliminate pain, and improve lives, it becomes harder to challenge the company without sounding like you're against progress. But skepticism is not the enemy of progress. Skepticism is part of progress. A real innovation should be able to survive questioning. A real breakthrough should be able to survive testing. A real company should be able to survive scrutiny. If a business can only survive when no one asks difficult questions, the problem is not the questions. The problem is the business. That's especially true for entrepreneurs. Let's face it, we all love our ideas. We all believe our products matter. We all want the world to see what we see. But belief can be dangerous when it refuses correction. A founder has to be persuasive enough to keep it going, but humble enough to listen when the evidence disagrees. That balance isn't easy. In fact, it's very hard. Too little belief and you never start. Too much belief and you stop seeing reality. The best entrepreneurs are not the ones who pretend everything is working. The best entrepreneurs are the ones who can look directly at what's not working and still keep moving forward. That is maturity. That is leadership. That is the difference between confidence and delusion. Theranos became a story about delusion, deception, and denial, but it didn't look that way at first. At first, it looked like the future. That is what makes the story so powerful. The company looked successful long before it was successful, if it ever was. It had the look, it had the language, it had the stage presence, it had the endorsements, it had the investment, it had the valuation, it had the board, it had the press, it had the founder myth. But success is not the appearance of progress. Success is progress that survives contact with reality. Theranos did not. Questions about the company's testing accuracy began to emerge. Former employees raised concerns. Investigative reporting exposed serious gaps between what Theranos claimed and what Theranos was actually doing. Regulators became involved. Business partners began to pull back. The credibility machine that had helped build the company began operating in reverse. That is another lesson. Attention magnifies whatever is underneath. If the business is strong, attention can help it grow. If the business is fragile, attention can expose the cracks. If the business is dishonest, attention can accelerate the collapse. Theranos had benefited enormously from attention, but once the truth began to emerge, that same attention made the fall even more public. The company that had been valued in the billions began to unravel. Walgreens ended its partnership. Regulators sanctioned the company. The company voided large numbers of test results. Investors sued. The SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, charged Theranos, Holmes, and Balwani with fraud. Theranos dissolved in 2018. The company that once promised to change healthcare was gone. But the consequences didn't end with the company. Investors lost hundreds of millions of dollars. Patients were put at risk. Employees saw their work and reputations damaged. Partners had to explain how they missed the warning signs. Board members and supporters faced questions about their judgment. The media had to examine how easily it had helped elevate the story. And the founder, who had once been celebrated as the next great visionary entrepreneur, became a symbol of one of the most infamous business failures in modern history. Elizabeth Holmes was convicted on investor fraud charges and sentenced to more than 11 years in prison. Sunny Balwani, Theranos' former president and chief operating officer, was convicted separately and sentenced to more than 12 years. That's the legal ending. But the business lesson is much bigger than the courtroom. Theranos shows us what happens when the story becomes bigger than the truth. At the beginning, the story serves the business. It attracts capital, it attracts talent, it attracts partners, it attracts customers, it creates momentum, it gives people something to believe in. But if the story is not consistently corrected by evidence, the relationship changes. The business begins serving the story. That's when things go wrong. Bad data becomes inconvenient. Misstories become messaging problems. Technical failures become secrets. Skeptics become enemies. Employees learn what not to say. Leadership becomes more concerned with protecting the appearance of progress than achieving actual progress. That's not building a company, that's performing a company. And performance is not sustainable. This isn't limited to just Silicon Valley. It can happen anywhere. A manufacturer can promise delivery dates that it knows it can't meet. A software company can sell features that are not yet stable. A consultant can claim expertise that doesn't exist. A startup can inflate traction. A public company can manage perception instead of performance. A salesperson can overcome capabilities and leave operations to deal with the consequences. A founder can become so invested in being right that no one in the company feels safe telling the truth. The scale may be different, but the pattern is familiar. The story becomes bigger than the truth. And when that happens, the company becomes vulnerable. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. because the truth always becomes operational. Eventually, the product has to work. Eventually, the customer has to be satisfied. Eventually, the test result has to be accurate. Eventually, the delivery date has to be met. Eventually, the process has to hold. Eventually, the claim has to be proven. Eventually, reality gets a vote, and reality is usually the deciding vote. One of the hardest things for entrepreneurs to do is separate belief from evidence. Belief is necessary. Without belief, you'll never start. Without belief, you never challenge the incumbent. Without belief, you never take the risk. Without belief, you never build something new. But belief has to be disciplined. It has to be tested. It has to be willing to lose an argument with reality. That's where good leadership comes in. Good leadership doesn't demand the facts support the vision. Good leadership adjusts the vision when the facts demand it. Good leadership creates an environment where bad news is not punished. Good leadership understands that a failed test is not a betrayal, it's information. Good leadership knows that customers, investors, employees, and partners deserve honesty, especially when the truth is uncomfortable. That doesn't mean leaders should be pessimistic. It means that they should be truthful, and there is a difference. Optimism says, this is hard, but we believe we can solve it. Delusion says, this is solved, even though the evidence says otherwise. Integrity says, we're not ready yet. Fraud says, tell them it works. Theranos had ambition, it had attention, it had money, it had powerful supporters, it had a mission people wanted to believe, but it lacked the one thing that mattered most: proof. And without proof, the rest eventually collapsed. The reluctant lesson from Theranos is actually quite simple. A powerful story can open doors, but only truth can keep them open. Vision can inspire a company, but validation must guide it. Confidence can attract attention, but evidence must earn trust. And when the story becomes bigger than the truth, the company is no longer building the future. It's borrowing against a future that may never arrive. Theranos promised to revolutionize blood testing. Instead, it became a warning. Not because the dream was too big, but because the truth became too inconvenient. And no business, no matter how visionary, no matter how well-funded, no matter how celebrated, and no matter how many important people stand behind it, can outrun the truth forever. If you enjoyed this episode of Reluctant Lessons, where businesses go wrong, there's more coming because the pattern is always the same. Success leaves clues, but so does failure. We have many more Reluctant Lessons coming your way. As it turns out, there's no shortage. So be sure to subscribe to the Reluctant Entrepreneur podcast so you don't miss an episode. And finally, remember, success leaves clues, but failure leaves lessons if you're willing to see them. Thanks so much for being here. I'll see you again on the next episode of Reluctant Lessons.